Welcome everyone. It's wonderful to see you here. My name is Olga Viligurska. I'm the director of CEEMAN, and it's my pleasure to open this webinar today with Joe Mahoney. We have more than 200 participants registered for today's event from 41 countries, so all over the world, starting from the East, China, Singapore, Saudi Arabia, all over Europe, Africa, Latin America. So welcome. It's great to have you with us. So just to give you a little bit of a background about CEEMAN and what we do and how we got to the idea of this webinar, let me share with you just very basic facts about us. Let me see. So CEEMAN is the International Association for Management Development in Dynamic Societies, and we've been running for more than 25 years now, originally focusing on Central and Eastern Europe, but then gradually expanding our coverage to welcome more than 200 members from 50 countries around the world. So only about more than half from Central and Eastern Europe, others from all over the world. And what we do is we try to help management schools, business schools develop. And one of the key our activities is in IMTA, International Management Teachers Academy, where we had the pleasure to educate more than 650 teachers of management from all over the world. And this is where we met Joe O'Mahony. And that's where I personally met him back in 2004. So he was a student in our academy, and we kept in touch since then. So it's a pleasure to welcome him again with us. So we do also other educational programs for deans, faculty, and staff. We do work with consultants also within the frame of IMTA Academy, and in all our activities, our key focus is on relevance and excellence of management education. So these are some of the webinars that we are running also online now. Since we're all in lockdown, we try to provide some additional value also to our members and partners. So today we will talk about consulting. Then we will have also another webinar on 28th of May, talking more about digital teaching and learning. And then in early June, we will also host a very interesting panel with business leaders to see what do CEOs want from our business graduates. So just a couple of house rules. We are recording the webinar, and we will share it with all of you. We are also live streaming on Facebook so that more colleagues can join us and contribute with their comments, with questions. Since it's a webinar format, we don't have chat enabled. Please post your questions in Q&A section on the bottom of your screen. You have this button Q&A. So post your questions or comments or anything you want to share with us there, and we will try to cover as many questions as possible with you. I do have a very quick poll that I want to run before inviting Joe in, while inviting Joe to join us. So can you please share with us if you have any experience in consulting so far? Have you been a consultant, or maybe you are working in consulting or on consulting projects now, just that we understand a little bit better who is in the room with us. And Joe, please join us.
Hi.
Hi, Joe.
How are you doing?
Good,
hey.
Good. Great to have you with us. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Very kind. Thank you, Olga. Shall I kick off then?
Yes, please do. Let us allow maybe just a couple of seconds. We have almost 90% of people voted, and 68% have experience in consulting. So I think it's an interesting fact for you also to take into account.
Yep. That's really useful. Thank you. It's good to know. The presentation speaks to both consultants and I guess people that work in business schools and business students who want to become consultants.
Absolutely. And we see a lot of synergies here, actually, because we see a lot of management educators working also in consulting. And also there is the trend the other direction, some consultants decide to go more into management education and to start teaching in business school. So I think it's a lot of nice potential for collaboration there. So can you see the poll results on the screen?
Yep.
Yeah, super. Okay, I will stop sharing the results, and Joe, the floor is yours. Looking forward.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Olga, and thank you everyone for joining. Okay, this is really exciting for me. As Olga said, I was involved with consulting, with CEEMAN about, 16 years ago now, and it was the first holiday I had with my girlfriend, who is now my wife, who is downstairs with our 2 children. So I have a very soft spot for CEEMAN. I had an amazing time there. I'm going to talk quite quickly because there's a lot to get through. If I don't get through everything, feel free to contact me at LinkedIn, where I'll be posting more information as I get it from my research project. I'm doing a research project around how small consultancies grow successfully. I'm writing a book on that at the moment. Halfway through writing this and researching it by interviewing founders of consulting firms, COVID hit. So I started adding more and more questions on to CEOs about how they were responding to COVID. So I'm really giving you some of the insights. My background is I did history at Oxford, so I'm a historian by training, and that will become relevant later. Couldn't get a job, obviously, so I did my master's and PhD in business, became a management consultant after several years in the consulting industry, decided to come back to academia, where I specialized in management consultancy, and now I think I'm the only professor of management consultancy in the world. That doesn't mean much because you can name yourself anything you want once you get to professor. I research, write, and teach management consultancy. If you want to know more about me, go to my LinkedIn profile. Okay, so what are we going to run through? 4 things. First 2 are about the past. So how has the market changed in response to COVID, and what are firms' responses? That will be useful for those of you who are consultants. What's happening with students, thirdly, so that's more about the present. How do we support students who want to become management consultants? What should we tell them? And what's happening with their job opportunities? And finally, the future. And there's a lot about how do we get through COVID. I want to talk about what happens after COVID and how specifically management consultancies and business schools can help lead us in a better direction than the one we have been going in the past. Okay, so let's crack on. Okay, so first of all, market changes. What's happening? There are some figures from Source for Global Research, which is a very good source of information, if you pardon the pun, about the consulting industry. They're predicting, based on interviews with CEOs, a 20% drop in consulting revenues globally. They are seeing that as hitting Europe more heavily than the rest of the world. And in Britain, it's going to be especially bad because of the Brexit situation, which is crazy, but we are stuck with it. Now, this is the high-level figures. So what I've done in my research, I've done a whole load of interviews with CEOs and also chucked out a questionnaire which really asks people individually about whether they are much busier all the way through to much slower. And this provides a much nicer breakdown of what's happening. And this is internationally. Now, obviously, the vast majority of consultancies are seeing a big hit. Some of the medium-sized and small consultancies I'm talking to are looking as if they might go bankrupt in the next few years or in the next few months. However, there is a significant proportion of consultancies that are saying they are either much busier or busier. I interviewed a CEO this morning who was saying that he simply couldn't cope with the amount of new business that he was getting. Now, a lot of these CEOs would like to think this was down to the brilliant strategy that they took, and to some extent it is. Obviously, if you have a more diversified portfolio, you're more likely to weather storms. But there's also a huge amount of luck here. If you specialized in restructuring or crisis management prior to COVID, then you're clearly going to be run off your feet. If you specialized in anything that a director can put a line through, they will have done so, and you will probably be out on your ear, or you'll have had your projects postponed. So it's not a pretty picture generally, but there are pockets of good news, which isn't much joy for those who are in a bad situation. Anyway, let's crack on. So how does this work out by sector? I've combined sources from my own data, but also sources from other areas, other sources of data, to produce this fairly crude map in terms of what sectors have been hit hardest, what digital and technology, what services have been hit hardest. Digital and technology has massive growth anyway, sort of, we're talking 20 to 30% compound annual growth rate of this service, and it's hardly been hit at all. Nor has risk and regulatory. Finance, strategy, people and change are being hit, at least according to my data. However, this is going to change significantly. So what we're going to see through the next year, different stages of firms' responses to COVID. At the moment, a lot of firms for the last 3 months have been in panic mode. So they're cutting all non-essential consulting work and turning to consultancies that specialize in things that will help them get through the change. And I'll talk more about that later. The other thing that this picture masks is the diverse reactions that I would talk about here. So, for example, in strategy consultancy, you're getting a huge mix between strategy firms that have specialized in work that isn't essential, and clients are literally just putting a line through it saying we are not going to spend on product diversification into new markets. But if you are dealing with strategy in mergers and acquisitions or crisis management or restructuring or whatever, you're much more likely to see your business going up. So within each one of these pots, you're still getting a huge amount of differences in consulting firms. So that's, I could tell you a lot of stories more qualitatively about the impact on different firms. And they range from the utter depressing, we are going to close, all the way through to the wonderful, which is, we're expanding massively and can't recruit enough people. So how are firms responding to this? Okay, so initially you had sort of the rabbit in the headlights response. I'm not sure if that phrase translates perfectly, but you'll get it from the image. What happened in 2008 is that a lot of consultancies faced with the recession and declining client spend overcompensated and sacked a lot of their staff, sold off a lot of their assets. When the market started to pick up for consulting firms, which it did in 2009, and then has grown every year, I'm talking about averages here, then has grown every year since then, those firms who had sacked people couldn't recruit people fast enough. So firms so far have been quite hesitant to get rid of full-time staff. There are exceptions, and I'll be happy to talk about those. But what you're getting now is I guess a slow progression of tactics that firms are taking in terms of their cost base. We'll look at their client response next, but in terms of their cost base, the first things that you saw was internal staff shifts. That's very often around getting rid of associates and putting full-time staff who were on the bench onto those projects. So you've seen a lot of firms cancel or postpone internships and cancel and postpone recruitment and promotion. Pretty much all of the major firms now have, and including McKinsey, Bain, Boston Consulting Group, have postponed recruitment. What I'd like you to understand is that whilst I'm talking about this, what tends to happen is that the small firms do this first because their pockets are smaller. Then you get the big four, Accenture, IBM, Tata doing it. And then you get McKinsey, Bain, and Boston Consulting Group doing it. That's partly in terms of the reputational damage that might be done, but it's also in terms of how deep are those firms' pockets and what types of margins that they are making. Obviously getting bonuses cut increasingly. So the further we get down this scope is things that have been done more recently. So more recently, literally in the last week, I have heard of KPMG and Accenture asking employees to take forced leave or forced holiday or unpaid work, unpaid days, or doing 4-day weeks. Obviously, one of the last things firms want to do is to hit partner pay, but increasingly getting news from the major consultancies around partner and employee pay being cut. And finally, we're getting an increasing number of firms taking furlough or government assistance where it is available. So that's what we're seeing up until now. What will happen over the next 6 months to a year, depending on the type of recovery we have, is an increasing number of firms making redundancies. Again, this is getting worse and worse, making redundancies, asking for external capital, including their partners, putting money in, selling their assets, and finally going bankrupt. Now, the extent to which this happens is going to be very much based on what type of recovery. I've got the U, the W, the L, and the V recovery shapes on the right-hand side of the page here. If you don't know what those are, I'm not going to explain, but you can look them up quite easily. My own prediction is a sort of L and W combined, which I think is going to last longer than many of the firms are predicting at the moment. But hey, what do I know? Okay, so that's what's happening in terms of their cost management. I also wanted to talk about what the good firms, the firms that are doing well, or the firms that found themselves in a tough situation and are now doing well, have been doing. And the first thing, and this is absolutely fundamental, is a pivoting of their value proposition. Some consultancies I've spoken to have literally done this within a week. So they have shifted from being a focus on change management to a focus on crisis management. And the key things that clients need help with at the moment are protect. And these are the things that I am seeing consultancies pivot to. So you can literally see LinkedIn profiles changing, websites changing, services changing. And there's an interesting strategy by which they do this, because very often the clients that know these firms, and I'm talking about medium-sized firms here, the clients that know these firms know them as change management firms rather than crisis management firms. So what they're doing is targeting new firms with the new value proposition. So these are a series of things that firms have told me that their clients need from them now, or the types of things that firms have pivoted in order to provide. So that's protecting employees, supply chain security, business model innovation, etc. I'm not going to talk through them because you can read them either now or later. So that's the first major thing, is firms having shifted their value proposition. And by value proposition, I mean a sort of strategic overall market offering. But then underneath that, you get specific services and markets which are being targeted. Obviously, some markets are being hit much harder than others. If you are if you're a discretionary spend consultancy in the airline industry or the travel industry, you've probably had it. If you have a diversified portfolio, which if you have a small consultancy, you should be doing, even if you are a one-person band, you should be focusing on having no more than 20% of your revenues from one client, and ideally not from one sector. The other thing I'm seeing a lot of consultancies doing, and clients have been emphasizing this as well, is really placing stress on the value and the return on investment that consulting firms are providing for their clients. It's one of the things that I always say to the consultants that I coach, is that they need to make what the activities that they are doing fundamental, and to be seen as fundamental to the projects that they are a part of. And if you have done this, it is much harder for a client director to take a line and through the work that you're doing, especially if you have emphasized the value that you're providing and the return on investment that they will be getting, because they're unlikely to put a line through it because it's future income. A vast number of firms are providing free analysis, webinars, live streaming, data. If you want to see a great example of this in action, go to a firm called Elixir, ELIXRR. They are doing great stuff on LinkedIn and on their website, specifically around COVID, which they've never had any experience of before, but they're really just crunching the data and coming up with some beautiful presentations that help clients. And if they can do it, there's no reason why you can do it. And correspondingly, their profits are not being hit by COVID, and it's primarily because of their pivoting of their value proposition. What else is going on? Client relationship management. I'm not going to talk about this because it's fairly obvious. But if you haven't been managing your client relationships properly, you'll probably find that your work drops off faster. There are obviously consultants within consulting firms that have been hit who are on the bench. Those that can afford to keep them on the bench are placing them directly on working on the development of new intellectual property. And to some extent, that's new services, products, methods that are more targeted to a recessionary audience. But it's also about, you know, better internal systems. There's going to be a whole load of things that I'm sure those of you who are in consulting at the moment or lead a consulting firm would be thinking, we should do this sometime. And a lot of them are getting people to do that. And that provides long-term value to your firm. Certainly buyers of consulting firms place a huge priority on intellectual property, not just products and services, but also internal intellectual property in terms of how you approach clients, how you work, the methods and the databases you have, etc. Some firms are doing a work now, pay later scheme. So and this again is down to if you can afford it, where they say to the client, look, this work is important. We're happy to take the costs now, providing that there is some payback later. And I've heard that in about 15 to 20% of the consultancies that I've been interviewing. And finally, and I would link this to the first point around the pivoting of the value proposition. Online advertising is dead cheap now. It's about half the price that it was prior to COVID, for obvious reasons. What a lot of successful firms are doing successfully is taking their new value proposition and the intellectual property and pushing it through online advertising, primarily in LinkedIn, but also you see, you know, I still get stuff coming up on my Facebook stream, although I'm not sure many clients buy through Facebook ads. Okay, so that's what the firms are doing. I just checked to see how I'm doing for time. Not too bad. Okay, so for those of you, I'm going to go back to consulting later, but I just want to make a couple of brief points for those of you that are in business schools. And what you will be finding is that your students, whether they are good or outstanding, will have found that their internships and their job offers have at least been postponed. There are some exceptions, but once McKinsey, Bain and Boston are postponing internships and job offers, and they're pushing them back to winter. So we're not postponing by a couple of months, which is what they were doing a few weeks ago. They're postponing, and I think that will be pushed out again. I personally think we're not going to see a pickup in recruitment until next Easter. So how do you support your graduates? The advice that's been given so far is very much around, oh, you know, don't worry, hold on, things will pick up. They did in 2008, they did after 9/11, they did in 2000, so just hold on. Yeah, great, fine. But that doesn't actually help the student, because all that means is that there's going to be another wave of students that they're going to be competing against. So I coach a lot of students personally, and I've taught, you know, I don't know, 10,000 students and consultants about the consulting industry. So I would say now is the moment to boost your skills. So consulting is still the #1 career choice of students in business schools. I very much would push them to reskill. They should have been reskilling towards technology and digital anyway, because it's the massive growth area. It is no longer sufficient to get a standard MBA and expect to get into McKinsey, Bain, Boston, or even the Big Four. If you have some form of certification in technology or digital, you're at a massive advantage. That doesn't need to be done at a university. Shock horror. I shouldn't be saying it. I'm sure someone's going to kill me soon. It can be done through one of the amazing online courses. You don't need to be a techie to do this. I would stress this. You don't need to be a technologist in order to understand technology from a business perspective. I ended up head of digital at one of the mobile phone companies. I knew nothing about digital, but I knew a lot about business. So #1, reskill. #2, in terms of the focus of your job applications, try and target firms that are expanding. So there's a whole load of firms, big and small, that focus on restructuring, crisis management, cost reduction. Healthcare is going to be a massive growth industry for healthcare consultants. consultants, and digital. Digital consultancies, those that specialize in digital, are still recruiting massively. So reprioritize your focus. If you have been pushed back, if your job offer has been pushed back, I would assume, I mean, I don't think it will be cancelled in many cases, but I would assume the worst and get applications out to other consultancies. Many of these consultancies can be found on the ICMCI website or the Charter Management Institute website or on the Management Consultancies Association website. Someone like Alex and Partners, who specialize in restructuring and strategy, would be perfect. They'll be expanding, they're still recruiting, and they have a reputation that's not far off MBB, McKinsey, Bain and Boston Consulting Group. The other thing I would say is research, publish, network, and build your reputation. There's going to be students who are sitting around in front of a computer. They're not allowed out. Now is the time, especially if they're starting their dissertations. Do your dissertation on something that will help you get a job. I know it's a no-brainer, but I'd say 70% of my students come to me with an idea for a dissertation that is in no way going to help them get a good job. So do your dissertation on something, something that's going to help you, and publish it. Publish it on LinkedIn. Write small blog pieces. Network. Send it to consultants that you think might be interested. Okay. I don't want to do any big advertising, but I have a website called Consulting Mastered. There's a whole load of free information up there. I provide it to universities to support their students. It's got 60 videos on consultancy and how to get a job in it. There's a live monthly webinar with me and various other things. So there's a load of free information for consultants out there. I'm constantly updating it. So if you want access to it, I'm providing that free of charge for students until October. So just drop me an email and I will provide you codes for it. Okay, enough of the sale. Okay, the final thing I wanted to talk to you, just see how long I've got. Brilliant, got 10 minutes. I can slow down a little bit. So apologies for the speed of my talking. Business schools and consultancies are primarily a demand-led industries. In other words, consultancies do what clients ask them to do. I know they say they don't, but generally they do what clients ask them to do. Business schools offer courses that the students want to do, or at least think they want to do, and sound good in marketing. I think the good consultancies are starting to show leadership in creating the new normal, and by that I mean we have a responsibility as advisors to CEOs and as teachers of future CEOs to help change the way they think. And the reason I'm emphasizing this now is because this crisis and the coming environmental crisis is going to manifest trends in society that have been happening. This is my historian background coming out now. So what you typically get over history are long trends that slowly build pressure, but things very often don't change in a socio-economic context until there is a crisis. And we will have had three crises. We'll have the 2008 recession, we'll have had COVID, and we'll have a potential environmental crisis. And business schools and consultancies increasingly not only have a responsibility to shape that, but also it's going to be good for them to do so. Because if they are not on board with the new thinking, then they're going to be in danger of being made redundant. And I'll give you some examples of that later. So what we're seeing at the moment are some big taboos that are being popped, some big bubbles, balloons that are being popped. Number one is that there should be small government. And I don't know what your government is like where you are. I realize we've got 41 countries from around the world, but certainly my government, before it does anything, it does a big focus group to find out how popular that's going to be, and then does the most popular thing. What we're getting now is big government taking leadership. And that is relatively rare. It happened in 2008. It's happening now, and it's going to need to happen for if we are seriously going to tackle the environmental challenges ahead of us. So that's the first bubble. The second bubble is that, my God, who would have thought it, but science works and experts rock. All of a sudden you have scientists sharing platforms, even with Donald Trump. So we are talking about a fundamental shift from people that put science down to fake news. See the hands, little hands. And in our own country, we had a very senior minister say that people had had enough of experts. Well, unfortunately, if you ignore science, it comes back and bites you. And the bite here is people dying. And so governments are having to take responsibility and listen to scientists. So that's the second bubble. The third bubble, we found the magic money tree. We were told after 2008 that the bills needed to be paid. There was no magic money tree, but we have found the magic money tree. And we have Republicans and Conservatives saying, hey, you know, debt is cheap. Let's borrow our way out of this. And if they're going to borrow their way out of this, that is going to lead to big government. And it's also going to justify the population saying, well, if we can borrow for COVID, why can't we borrow for homelessness, the gap between the rich and the poor, environmental disaster, etc. Fourthly, now Homo economicus has always, oh, I've spelled that wrong, sorry, there's a missing U there. It has been proclaimed to be dead for a long time, but is now buried. The people that we have relied upon here are people that are doing selfless things. The people that are at the bottom of society, the people that clean the rubbish, the people that work in hospitals, very often doing the dirty work, the people that deliver our letters are suddenly the heroes. What you get typically in history is that when society firstly becomes utterly reliant on people but recognizes its reliance on these people, you get a shift in thinking and a shift in power. So that's the fourth thing. And this isn't going to be a one-off. So we've had it previously in 2008. We're going to have it in the future. So there are big changes afoot. And how I'm framing this, the reason I'm telling you about this, is because this is the crisis that is going to make all these trends manifest. So why is this? Why am I telling you about this instead of a sociology class? Well, it's relevant, it's completely relevant to consultancies and completely relevant to clients and to business schools. Because what we have an option, we have options coming out of this, and I've put two choices here. It could be 3, it could be 8. You can, but I want, you know, I've only got a certain amount of time, so I'm focusing on the quick. So what I'm framing as I guess a bad outcome is the rise in nationalism, heavy public sector cuts in order to pay for the bill. Climate disaster, simply because we don't have the money to transition to a green economy, and the rise in autocracy. And all of these things follow relatively logically from some of the things that I've mentioned here. So that you can see some governments already are claiming that COVID gives them the power to seize powers that they didn't have previously. The other alternative is a growth in internationalism. So obviously, if we'd had better international institutions around healthcare and also other forms of international cooperation, we'd have done much better in this crisis. Modern management theory, which really confirms the argument that it's sort of a neo-Keynesian approach to economics, for those of you that are in business schools, and environmental and social and governance funds. So this is really economic theory that's saying, actually, we don't need to pay off the debt. Debt is incredibly cheap. We can borrow for the foreseeable future. And in the economic climate that we've got, it's okay for government banks to buy government debt. The New Green Deal, this is very similar to what Roosevelt had after the Great Depression in the US. And finally, better forms of democracy, as we have become more reliant, and that reliance is visible of those who are potentially poor or sometimes seen at the bottom of society. So what I'm framing here is that we have two options ahead of us. And the option on the left, as if you're seeing what I'm seeing, isn't just bad ethically and morally and bad for people, but it's also economically bad. It's bad for clients, it's going to be bad for consultancies. On the right, you have a situation that is not only sustainable, I would argue ethically better, but also better for consultancies and for their clients. And I think a lot of the better consultancies are recognizing this. So in other words, I think that on the right-hand side, business schools and consultancies need to be teaching, researching, and advising around the right-hand right-hand side of this page. And as an example of this, I want to just show you some quotes that I've seen recently on a website. So this is from a consultant website, Reimagining Capitalism to better serve society, how capitalism fostered income inequality, the opportunities and challenges in restructuring capitalism, and capitalism in crisis. Now, what type of lefty rag would publish this type of nonsense? Is it The Guardian or CNN or the Washington Post? Well, it's not, it's McKinsey. And McKinsey & Co., where McKinsey & Co. go, you can guarantee they've done a lot of thought about the potential client markets for this and the potential future situation that they're going to find themselves in. McKinsey has been pouring thought leadership into challenging traditional notions of neoliberal capitalism. So I don't want to labor the point because I don't have enough time, but I guess one of the things I want to stress is that we need to take seriously, both in terms of economics and in terms of ethics and sustainability, the responsibility that we have as consultants, as advisors of companies, and as business schools who are educators of future leaders, to align ourselves with a better society. Anyway, sorry. On that grand note, I will be quiet. So I want to. Okay. So finally, to do. Sorry, I'm gonna summarize. So if you're in consultancy, you need to cut and pivot. It's not too late, but it's going to be too late soon. Those consultancies that have cut drastically and pivoted their value proposition are doing very well. If you are a university, go to consultingmaster.com or send your students there, or phone me up for free codes for your students. If you are a consultant or a university, it's time to show real thought leadership in the courses you offer, the research you do, and the advice that you give. Okay, I hope that was useful. I'm going to look at the Q&As now. We've got about 20 minutes for questions, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions you have. So type them in the Q&A column. I've got something here from Ben Donahue, who says that when you say MBAs should be upskilling in tech, what particular skills or course content would you recommend? Many MBA programs, yes, of course, yeah. Many MBA programs, including my own, have courses on data analytics, etc. And if that's so, fantastic. But still, reskilling isn't just about getting the skills. It's also about showing the potential employers that you have those skills. So if you do an additional qualification, say you've got your course did data analytics, then do some coding in Python. Or even better, start to sell those skills online. There's a whole load of companies, even if you're selling them on Fiverr relatively cheaply, then it still shows. You don't have to tell consultancies or recruiters how much you're selling your services for. Build a website, offer your services, provide strategic advice, create a blog. So yes, you're completely right, Ben. MBAs do offer that, but there's a whole host of things that MBAs are quite behind on. The big things for me, massive growth areas in consultancy, artificial intelligence, cloud software and cloud computing, machine learning, and big data. Those four things, if you can show that you have any relationship with those, you are going to be snapped up. I have a very good friend who has been looking for for somebody with 3 years experience of artificial intelligence and machine learning. He's been advertising for a year, has had no applications at all. He said the talent just simply, there isn't enough of it. And I'm getting that across the board. Even McKinsey, Bain, and Boston Consulting Group are struggling because a lot of the best graduates are now going to Facebook, Apple, Amazon, etc. Because it looks as good on their CV, if not better. Okay, next question. When can I apply for entry-level roles in MBB or other good consulting firms? Well, it depends on the firm. Most firms have a rolling recruitment process. Many of them have 2 rounds of recruitment, one at the beginning of the summer and one at the at the end of the year. So sort of, I guess we're talking December and June. However, what you'll find with the job applications is that that a lot of them have closed their recruitment simply because their existing consultants don't have enough work to work on. So those that have already been given job offers, those have been postponed, but those who haven't yet applied will find it very hard to find any roles not in all companies, but it depends on the department as well. So for example, Deloitte Technology is still recruiting, but Deloitte sort of their graduate program isn't so much. So it does depend. Tremendous press. Oh, thank you, James. That's very, thank you. There's some lovely comments here. That's really kind of you all. You can see I'm quite passionate about this, so I'm pleased that some people enjoyed it. Tremendous presentation. Thank you for that. How do you see the virtual and remote working embedding into the new norm going forward? Are the days of Monday to Friday away from home a thing of the past? I really hope not. I've got 2 kids and I love them, but they drive me up the wall. I'm getting no work done. But more seriously, yes, this has forced people to become technologically savvy. Even the most old school professors who were getting their secretaries to print out and type up their responses to emails are now Zooming. And that familiarity and the improvements that Zoom and Google Hangouts, etc., have been forced to make are going to make this easier. Firms, consulting firms' margins are obviously going to decrease. They're going to look at ways to cut costs. You can expect to see a lot of the beautiful offices in London, New York, and Paris sold and remote working. Whether or not it hits, I think it will hit projects. So I would have thought there would be an increasing amount of working from home with projects, especially in digital and technology. However, I can't see many consultancies cutting back on the face-to-face side of sales in the long term, simply because shaking hands physically with a potential client is always going to build trust faster, and consulting, as we all know, is a trust-based industry. Okay. How can we show real thought? How long we've got? Oh, we've got ages. This is great. I can talk about this for days. So, you know, if you get bored, just drop off. How can we show real thought leadership? Okay, so thought leadership. There's so much bad thought leadership out there, you know, you get some people saying some very interesting things. But number one, it has to be new. Yeah. So don't just repackage what everybody else is saying. Everybody is talking about the new normal. I talked about the new normal, hopefully with new insights. But say something new that's relevant to your clients. So that's number one, say something new. Number two, say something that's relevant to your clients. Number three, make it actionable. There's nothing worse than seeing a wonderful piece and then there's no reflection about, you know, we can help you solve this problem. The person that wrote this blog or insight piece or white paper or thought leadership piece is an expert who can help you solve these problems. The figures on this are quite high. Interestingly, CXOs, if they find relevant thought, now 50% of CEOs read thought leadership pieces. Of those, 50% end up contacting the thought leadership, whoever published the thought leadership piece. So it's an incredibly good way of getting clients, but most pieces that I see are pretty awful. Tell you who's very good on this. There's a woman called Fiona Czerniawska, who is the CEO of Source Global Research. And she knows thought leadership. She's done lots of research on thought leadership. So I know it from a consulting perspective, but she knows it better than I do. So look her up. I think I might have a blog about that somewhere. Anyway, okay. If you go to Consulting Mastered, you've got my blog there as well as other videos. Okay. How can small independent consultancy, this is from David Booth. Hello, David. I hope you're well. Small independent consultancies get an audience for their thought leadership. Against McKinsey, yeah, okay. So you're not going to be competing with McKinsey. However, if you are a small consultancy, you should have defined a niche. There's no point being a generalist small consultant because you're doing everything okay rather than one thing brilliantly. As a small consultancy, you need to define a very narrow niche. And that's counterintuitive in some ways because you think, well, I'm narrowing my market. But of course, you need to narrow your market because you need to be seen as an expert. And if you're not seen as the expert, then you are competing with all the other consultancies and it's going to be a race to the bottom on price. And no consultant wants to get into that. So you should, first of all, have your niche. Once you've got your niche, you publish to that niche. And you publish to that niche by identifying the needs of the clients and the hotspots and their pain points and all the rest of it. And then you publish in one place, ideally LinkedIn, and then you buy some cheap software that allows you to replicate that on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. I'm going through this very quickly. In my course, I would probably spend half a day on this. I hope that helps. Okay, so and your voice. So I mean, all the obvious stuff. Go on LinkedIn. If you need to, pay for adverts on LinkedIn. They are expensive, more expensive than Facebook, but they do have an effect. And they are cheap at the moment, relatively cheap at the moment. You know, do webinars. I mean, I do this because I love consultancy, but you know, there's 100 people watching and 200 people registered who might watch it in the background and some more people on Facebook. Email me. I'm more than happy to expand on this. MMT is modern management theory, which is a neo-Keynesian form of thinking, which is very popular with politicians at the moment, and I think is going to allow us to move to the right-hand side of the page in terms of the good options, in terms of debt is cheap. I won't talk about it for too long because it's not an economics. But modern management theory, have a look. ESG is a form of, I guess, I was talking about it in terms of funds, ESG funds, environmental, social, and governance funds. These are ethical funds that I've been investing in for years and interestingly have outperformed the rest of the market. That's not why I invested in them. But you know, as people divest from coal and fossil fuel, it's more likely to see it's more likely to have an effect on these types of ethical things. Could you share details regarding your website login? I don't have a login, but I will give you. I do have login. Anyone that emails me or contacts me on LinkedIn, I will give them free codes for my Consulting Mastered website. So it's consultingmastered.com. I'll be launching another one at the end of the year, which is really to help small consultancies grow and small consultancies flourish. At the moment, this website, Consulting Mastered, helps graduates get better jobs in management consultancy. I set it up because it really horrified me how bad the advice was in many management schools. Bear in mind that consulting is the #1 career choice of students, and most students get knocked back because they don't understand the basics of the industry. They can't tell the difference between IBM and Accenture. They don't know what a leverage ratio is. They don't know what utilization rate. And also, each step of the recruitment process is relatively easy to get through if you practice the right stuff. And I don't just mean case interviews. I mean partner interviews and competence-based interviews. And it's stuff that I wish I'd known when I was a graduate. So I set up the website to help students to have the advantages that students at Harvard, INSEAD, Oxford, Cambridge have, because they get coached on all of this, and most students at business schools don't. Okay, sorry, I'm going. Okay, got a few questions. Michelle Lewis, when you say huge growth ahead for healthcare, do you mean the big known firms or the smaller individual firms? I mean all of them. It's likely to be relatively short-lived in terms of 1 or 2 years. This is just my point of view. I'm not an expert in healthcare consulting, but certainly those that I'm speaking to are saying that have specialized in this have said that there's been a massive increase in demand for change management, restructuring, crisis management, but also all the people side of healthcare, because obviously healthcare at the moment is in massive demand. There's massive change going on, and that's going to happen for a few years from now as healthcare systems firstly struggle to catch up with the backlog, and secondly deal with the continued spikes of COVID that are going to happen. There's also going to be huge amounts of government money poured into healthcare over the next few years. There's no government in the world now that is going to have the guts to cut funding for healthcare, because it's politically it will be a disaster, because these people are giving their lives for our lives. And certainly in the UK, we all go out at 8 o'clock once a week and applaud people, applaud the NHS. Now, whatever you think of the NHS, try being a politician that's going to say, oh, we're going to cut funding to hospitals. So it's going to be suffering from change, and it's going to be massively funded. It's a no-brainer. Okay, I hope that helps, Michelle. Chitra, apart from digital and tech, what other areas are flourishing in consultants? Fintech, what are your thoughts about fintech? I mean, fintech, yes, anything with the word tech in it. I mean, digital has gone from, I mean, everyone talks about digital transformation. We had digital transformation 10 years ago. It was called business process reengineering. And then we had lean, or we had quality management. I mean, all of this had a digital aspect to it. So, you know, we didn't invent digital transformation 5 years ago. But certainly what's happened is that technology was in technology companies. Now what's happened is that that's being pushed down to a second tier of companies that aren't technology experts. So they need to outsource this, they need to strategize about it, they need to work out their costs, they need to have a service that helps them do this. So, I mean, Amazon cloud services are bringing in more money than Amazon, you know, the other parts of the Amazon business. So obviously anything with digital and tech is massive and is going to continue to grow massively. What other areas are flourishing? Well, I can give you the answer pre-COVID, but that's irrelevant now. That's dead, and I would have given you a very different answer. Regulatory is growing massively at the moment and will continue to grow massively. Risk management, crisis management, scenario planning, all of these types of things are things that you can pivot to. Have a look at the list I gave you earlier, if that's okay. I hope that helps. Thank you, Joe. So Davor, thank you, Joe, for your interesting presentation. Could you please once again mention the name of the consulting firm on LinkedIn that has quality presentations? Elixir, Elixir, ELIXRR. The guy in charge, Steve Newton, brilliant guy, top strategy guy, positioning himself to take on the McKinsey's, Bain's, Boston Consulting Group, and I believe he's going to do it. They've grown from nothing to, I think the revenue last year was 30 million in a few years. So Elixir is the place you want to go. Just have a look at them on LinkedIn. I mean, great presentations, brilliant website as well. If you want an idea of how to do a website, I mean, seriously, some of the consulting websites out there, even the large consultancies, are pretty awful. Okay, so James Brewster, okay, I'll read that later. That's really a comment on an answer I gave earlier. Deborah, hi, Deborah Fleming, how are you? Nice to hear from you. Hi, Joe, is there more scope for consultancy products becoming more sustainable? For example, plastic-free events? Yeah, I mean, definitely. So as an example, Cardiff Business School, it's a top 10 business school in the UK, but it's not sort of, you know, Oxford, Cambridge. But we rebranded ourselves a couple of years ago to be the Public Value Business School. We've got bees on the roof. We banned plastic. We incorporate, instead of our students going to work with consultancies, they act as consultants for charities. They work for the public sector. They do good things. And so business schools are certainly doing it. And I'm increasingly seeing clients that I deal with demanding that from us. So I've had clients, you know, coming to the business school and previously and saying, well, why are you using plastic bottles, you know, when there's a tap there, etc. So Deborah, thank you very much. There's hundreds of examples of consultancies jumping on that bandwagon, but increasingly it's not going to become a bandwagon. If you are responding rather than leading the way environmentally and with everything else that's going to be a major trend, you're going to look backwards to your clients. you want to look forwards. You want to take a risk. You know, doing the same thing isn't going to work for the next 5 years. This is the time to be radical. This is the time to take the chance, because things will be shifting, and those that pivot fastest are generally the ones that will do best. Okay, Timur, nice to hear from you. How would you see the optimal balance between standard frameworks or individual tailor-made advice in terms of efficiency and value for the customer? The size or industry of the customer matter in this respect. Not the size or industry of the customer so much, but really where you're positioning yourself as a consultant. So the question here is, you've got sort of the standardized, the standardized commodified products and services, and then you've got the individual personalized one-to-one bespoke offerings where every client is new. So the answer to this question, which one should you do, or which should you give more emphasis for, is entirely dependent on what type of consultancy you are. If you are a boutique strategy firm that is charging a vast amount of money and high margins, low leverage rates, low utilization, high levels of quality recruitment, then you're going to be providing tailor-made services, because for you, a commodified service is a race to the bottom in terms of price. However, that probably accounts for 5% of consultancies. Probably less than that, actually, in terms of doing pure tailored work for your clients. Certainly, if you want to grow your consultancy and if you want someone to buy your consultancy in 10 years' time, which if you own a consultancy, you should be thinking about. I mean, why do all this work if someone's not going to buy it off you at the end of it? Hi, Olga. You should be thinking about intellectual property in terms of frameworks, standardized products, services, etc. I'm going to be quiet now because I've realized I've only got 2 minutes.
Joe, maybe you can take one more question and I will launch a quick poll just to see how useful it was for our participants. So one last question, please, while we launch the poll.
Okay, so I've got Alistair Crofts. Hi, Alistair. Will the looming, I'm going to get rid of that poll. Will the looming economic crisis cause an increase or decrease in the use of consulting services? What industries will invest the most in consulting? So it's going to hit. Now, consulting has recovered very quickly from any crisis, and actually most crises, I mean, it's only really the 2000 drop and the 2008 drop where consultancy was hit. Consultancy in the Western world has grown sort of 7 to 10% each year. In emerging markets, it's growing much higher rates than that. So I expect there to be a hit. I expect it to be a hit that lasts for 2 years. But again, it depends on the type of recovery. And my guess is as good as yours. I'm guessing a W recovery with a sort of L thrown into it. So it will cause a short-term decrease in the use of consulting services. What industries will invest the most in consulting? The ones that always have. I mean, the finance sector is at the top, telcos, and anyone that is highly dependent on technology or suffers from regulatory change. So I don't think there's going to be a massive change in the types of industries that will be investing, although healthcare is perhaps an exception, as is the public sector, actually. I'm expecting governments to become more interventionist and to get involved more. And so if you're doing public sector consulting, I can see that, especially if it's central government, public sector consulting, I can see that rising. But in all other cases, I'm expecting no change to the pattern of industry investment. I hope that's useful. Okay. Thank you for your time. I really love talking, as you can tell. And over to Olga. Thank you, Olga.
Thank you so much, Joe. I think it was very good, very fast paced. But yep. I saw that a lot of people appreciated it. So here is also your email and LinkedIn profile that some of the people were asking about so that they can get in touch. We will be sending the recording to everyone, so you will get all the slides, the video, everything. And we will go through the questions as well that were not answered and see if Joe can provide some additional insights on that. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Have a lovely evening. Hope to see you again. Bye-bye.
Take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.